Everyone, and welcome to the State Energy Planning Board meeting. I'm Doreen Harris, President and CEO of the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, or NYSERDA, and the Chair of the State Energy Planning Board. As a reminder, today's meeting is open to the public to observe, both in person here in Albany and on our live stream. I want to thank everyone who is here with us today and to those tuned in online. Next slide. Before turning to our agenda, I would like to welcome the members of the State Energy Planning Board and their designees. For the record, I note that we do have a quorum for today's meeting. I'd like to start by asking that each board member or delegate introduce themselves. Going around the table, please share your name, title, and agency. And if you're here on behalf of a board member, of course, please say so.
Morning, Rory Christian, Chair of the New York State Public Service Commission.
And Sean Mahar, Interim Commissioner of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation.
Deborah Nelson, representing Transportation Commissioner Marie-Therese Dominguez.
Hi, I'm Roberta Reardon. I'm from the Department of Labor.
I'm Assemblymember Dee Dee Barrett, and I chair the Assembly's Energy Committee.
Vincent Ravishir, designee for ESD Commissioner and CEO Hope Knight.
Hello, Keisha Santiago. I'm the Deputy Secretary of State at the Department of State. I'm here on behalf of Secretary Mosley.
Good afternoon, Kevin Malone, New York State Department of Health, representing Health Commissioner James McDonald. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Rich Dewey, President and CEO of the New York Independent System Operator.
Richard Ball, Commissioner, New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets.
William Suggs, Abe Nymack, President, and Con Edison.
Thank you. I do want to note our colleagues at the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services previously indicated they were unable to attend. And so with that, I'll note the quorum, and I want to thank you all for being here. So I'll now turn to our business for the day. Next slide, please. Please note that for the record that this agenda was shared with the board members and posted to the Energy Plan website for the public to review on December 2nd, 2024. As you see here, our agenda today is first to review and approve the minutes of the September 9th, 2024 board meeting. Second, to vote on changes to the board's bylaws. Hear presentations on the transition to a zero-emission electric grid, and discuss next steps for the state energy plan, and discuss other business as needed. So we have a full agenda. I know we have a number of speakers. Thank you all for coming, and I'll just start with a few opening remarks. So certainly, even since our last meeting, we've had some major developments in the world of energy planning here in our state, and really energy advancement of the energy transition writ large. Of course, top of mind for all of us is the change of administration in Washington. While we are seeing some of the early selections for cabinet positions, we will wait to see what impacts, if any, will need to be considered in our energy plan itself. I also want to note, as we turn the corner to 2025, NYSERDA is actually going to be celebrating our 50th year next year. And we were born of the 70s of an oil crisis at the time, and ultimately am pleased to be here to really think about our work in the context of the transition that we are part of, the clean energy transition. We have worked under the administrations of 9 different U.S. presidents in those 50 years and many more Congresses. So we certainly do look to find opportunities with the new federal administration to help advance our state objectives. But a few milestones. With respect to clean energy action, I want to note that in October, New York achieved 6 gigawatts of distributed solar installed in the state. This marks an incredible achievement, putting us 1 year ahead of schedule of our Climate Act goal. And just last week, we announced the execution of 23 contracts for large-scale renewable projects, onshore wind and solar, 2.5 gigawatts of clean solar and wind energy, enough to power more than 700,000 homes across the state. And these are projects that are actively under construction as we speak. certainly building our pipeline of renewables. But also, last month, we launched our appliance upgrade program, making us the first state in the nation to launch an Inflation Reduction Act-funded home appliance rebate program, which in this case is targeted to low and moderate income customers, making available point-of-sale rebates to replace inefficient or gas-powered clothes dryers with heat pump alternatives. And certainly, importantly, includes funding for electrical upgrades as needed as well. So that was an exciting milestone for consumers across our state. In addition, the State Energy Planning Board will be talking a lot about clean energy jobs, and I'm pleased to report that our annual Clean Energy Industry Report was issued last week, noting continued clean energy job growth in 2023, with 178,000 workers employed, a 5% jump over the previous year. That report is on our website, and it is a very strong marker of the industry's growth and the impacts thereof. I'll speak for my colleague, Chair Christian, in noting that the Department of Public Service has also published a proposal to establish a zero-emission program for the statewide electrical demand system. We'll learn more about this later in the afternoon as well. And on my other side, the New York Independent System Operator recently issued their biennial reliability needs assessment to evaluate the future reliability of the New York electric grid over a 10-year period. You'll hear more about that today, but we certainly appreciate the fact that the NYISO is vigilant in performing these studies and keeping the lights on. The RNA underscores the importance of the completion and realization of the Champlain Hudson Power Express project and our renewable energy portfolio, especially our offshore wind projects, to maintain system reliability. And we've seen with the two policy scenarios included in the RNA, realizing renewable energy generation, while not binding in either scenario, would increase statewide reliability margins considerably and would also fully address the New York City transmission security reliability need that's identified in 2033 and 34 in the base case. But I'd say the resource needs identified in the RNA may be resolved in a number of ways, including by new capacity resources coming into service, construction of additional transmission facilities, increased energy efficiency, integration of distributed energy resources, and growth in demand response participation. So in my mind, connecting the dots between the RNA and the energy plan really underscores the need for this energy plan to take into consideration the suite of supply and demand side resources we need to maintain reliability and advance our decarbonization and economic development goals. So that means this Energy Planning Board has to take a hard look at new technologies that will help us advance these goals synchronously, as well as consider how to realize the promise of flexible demand in that equation. And we certainly need to make significant strides in these areas over the next 15 years. And finally, in November, NYSERDA received more than 1,400 comments on our draft blueprint for consideration of advanced nuclear energy technologies. These comments are under consideration as we continue to work on finalizing the blueprint and advancing next steps in studying this technology and its potential to contribute to our zero-emission grid and the growth of our economy. So to support this work, NYSERDA has also released a request for information to gauge market interest in developing advanced nuclear energy technologies in our state. And we look forward to receiving responses through the deadline of December 16th. So these milestones come just in time for our agenda today and discussion on considerations and progress needed in the next energy plan as we look forward in the 15-year planning horizon that is part of this plan. And I want to thank our speakers in advance for sharing their insights and expertise. I also note that our meeting today comes near the end of our public comment period for the draft scope of the state energy plan. Board members will recall that the comment deadline was extended to December 16th. So we have begun to receive comments and we look forward to more coming in very soon. After that comment period closes, agency staff will consider and incorporate proposed revisions into the scope and then consider that final scope in our next board meeting. So that is my remarks. And with that, I will turn to our next agenda item. Next slide, please. The next agenda or item on the agenda today is to accept the meeting minutes of the State Energy Planning Board held on September 9th, 2024. Are there any comments on the minutes you have received? Hearing none, I will make a motion to accept the minutes into the record and will post them on the website. Do I have a second?
Second.
All members in favor? Opposed? The minutes are accepted into the record. Next slide. The next item on the agenda is to consider and act upon a resolution number 12, to adopt changes to the State Energy Planning Board bylaws. The proposed amendments are proposed to conform with the open meeting law provisions, allowing board members to participate in meetings via video conferencing from private locations under certain circumstances. Pursuant to the law, an in-person quorum of members will still need to gather at the same physical locations where members of the public can attend. If the quorum requirement is met, a board member may request in writing to attend from a private location due to extraordinary circumstances. Extraordinary circumstances include disability, illness, other medical condition, caregiving responsibilities, military service, death of a relative, or other urgent or unexpected circumstance that prevents physical attendance. Members participating via video conference under extraordinary circumstances must use visual and audio teleconferencing capabilities and must be heard, seen, and identified while the meeting is being conducted. A public hearing on these proposed amendments was held at NYSERDA's Albany office on November 22nd, 2024. No oral comments were received on the proposed amendments. May I have a motion approving the resolution number 12, authorizing the changes to the State Energy Planning Board bylaws? And a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The motion is carried and the bylaws will be changed accordingly. I will ask that the new bylaws be available on the Energy Plan website at energyplan.ny.gov. Next slide. We will now move into our next agenda item to hear presentations on the transition to a zero-emission grid. I would like to offer a warm welcome to our expert guest speakers. Thank you all for being with us here today and sharing your valuable insights. My colleague, Carl Moss, Vice President for Policy Analysis and Research at NYSERDA, will moderate, and I will hand the microphone to him. Carl.
Wonderful. Thank you, President Harris. And thank you to our guests. I will be introducing each of them in turn. But first, I just wanted to give a little bit of framing for the main event of what we're speaking about today. As we all know, a reliable, secure, and resilient electricity grid is essential to our clean energy transition. Per the state's Climate Act, New York is moving forward toward a zero-emission electric system that will be powered mainly by renewable energy sources such as wind, solar, and hydropower. At the same time, our state anticipates major growth in electric demand from economic development projects and widespread electrification of both transportation and buildings. As was noted in the Climate Action Council's scoping plan, the transition to a zero-emission grid brings both complex challenges and key opportunities, which industry leaders and multiple planning processes are grappling with at a deep level. As I mentioned at our initial meeting in September, we will synthesize this ongoing work as part of the upcoming state energy plan. And we are fortunate to have with us today 3 organizations whose work is central to assuring the reliability of the electricity system and to proactive planning for the clean energy transition. Our first speaker, Camilo Serna. Camilo is Senior Vice President of Strategy and External Engagement at the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, also known as NERC. He works with NERC's Board of Trustees, executive team, stakeholders, and regional entities to set NERC's strategic direction and to lead stakeholder engagement efforts, including collaboration with multiple levels of government. And we're really fortunate to have him joining us today. He's a long-time industry professional. Camilo has decades of experience in corporate strategy, strategic planning, stakeholder engagement, and regulatory affairs. So with that, Camilo, I turn the floor to you, and I think your slides are up, and you can have the mic.
Thank you, Carl, and good afternoon, everyone. Really appreciate the invitation. Really commend you for taking the opportunity to hear from us about what we see in terms of reliability. It is critical. Obviously, that's what we live and breathe, so I'm going to be very excited about talking about the topic of reliability, and definitely look forward to your comments, your questions. But we do come at this from that lens, reliability, because that's in our mandate. I'll talk about three things. First, I'll cover very quickly what NERC is, how do we do our work, just to ground you on that. Second, and that's the bulk of the presentation, I'll cover about some of the reliability challenges that we see. I would just say that my presentation is going to emphasize on a North American view. I know my colleagues here will take it down to the New York view. We'll have some elements related to New York, but really wanted to ground you on what we see in North America. And I mean North America inclusive of Canada, because our work also spans most of the Canadian provinces. And then I'll close out with what we see are going to be the key reliability priorities for us to address some of the challenges that we see. So before I get into the details, the bottom line message that we have when we look at the reliability trends in North America is that we are concerned. We do see significant challenges, and that we're working through a very challenging period. So maintaining and ensuring the reliability of the system is going to take our concerted effort. So we'll need your support and help in doing that. So on the next page, very quickly on NERC. NERC was established in 2005 by an act of Congress, and that was after the Northeast outage that I know many of you experienced here perhaps back in 2003. The organization was in existence before, dates back to the 60s. It was a voluntary organization in the electric utility industry to help develop standards. But the outage made this an imperative, and is established in 2005. Our vision is very simple. It's a highly secure and reliable bulk power system for North America. That's our vision. That's what guides our efforts. Our mission is to do that by effectively and efficiently managing risks. So we're really a risk management organization, the way I think about it. I'm new to NERC. I've been learning what we do, but really at the core, we're a risk management organization. So how do we do that? If you go to the next page, we evaluate and assess the risks to security and reliability. We collect information, we conduct assessments, we maintain situational awareness of the system. We have security information that is collected across the industry that we analyze and that we collect ourselves through our Electricity Information Sharing and Analysis Center, which is the ISAC. That's more on the security, cyber and physical security. And then once we collect the information, we evaluate and quantify the risks. And if we identify risks that are significant, we develop mitigation actions. The mitigation actions could be an alert that we send to the industry. We convene a task force. We develop a white paper. But probably what you are mostly aware is our standards. We develop standards, reliability and security, that are mandatory and enforceable. So then through our regional entities that was in the prior page, we enforce those standards. So you might be familiar with an organization called NPCC, the Northeast Power Coordinating Council. That's one of our 6 regional entities that helps us conduct the assessments, but also ensure compliance with the standards. And if they're not compliant, obviously figure out what are the corrective measures that we need to take. We do work, we're a stakeholder-driven organization. Any standard that we enact is driven by stakeholder process. It has to be approved by stakeholders. So it means the utilities, it means the ISOs, it means regulators are involved in our process, state consumer advocates, you name it. Our stakeholder process is very robust and far-reaching. So that's just quickly on NERC, so you kind of understand where we're coming from. When NERC was established in 2005, we worked mainly on what today I would consider more traditional risk mitigation strategies. We're looking at tree trimming, situational awareness, training and education. By all measures, when you look at the transmission system reliability in the US and Canada, it is very good. But today, moving to the next slide, we are really facing a multiple set of risks that are really very unique, significant, and they're all happening at the same time. So I'll talk about 4 of those. One is the rapidly changing resource mix. Second is the accelerating demand. Third is the extreme weather complexities. And fourth is our increasing dependence on natural gas across many regions in North America. So what I want to do is unpack each of these because they're all impacting the system at the same time with a significant degree of impact. So let me start with the change in resource mix on the next page. There, what we see is really the pace of retirements in North America is large and problematic for us. If you look into the future, we have 78 gigawatts of installed capacity that is due to retire, and about 37 gigawatts of announced retirements. That's 115 gigawatts. You might say, well, what does that mean? That's more than 10% of the installed capacity across North America. And that's happening at the time that we are changing the mix of generation and growing the system. So that's not an insignificant task to accomplish. So that's particularly telling in the MISO and PJM regions of the US. And what you see on the right-hand side of the chart there is, this is not an issue that we need to worry about 10 years from now. This is happening now over the next 3 years, 5 years, changes by region. What the map shows is where do we begin to see resource adequacy concerns across North America. And you see some regions like MISO, we indicate that's as soon as 2025, given the pace of retirements and the pace of additions is not keeping up. So that's one of the concerning elements. If you go to the next page, we're encouraged that the interconnection queue, the new resources connecting to the system is large, 400 gigawatts. So that's a big number. But we know not all of those projects turn into fruition. And this is only tier 1, tier 2, which are more secure. There is a larger interconnection queue beyond what we show there. But 80% plus of the interconnection queue is solar, batteries, and wind. And those are great resources, but they come with some complications that we need to account for and manage through. And the other piece on the right-hand side, what we've seen, especially over the last year, is the pace of deployment of some of these resources is slowing down. That's an example of solar, where we expected an amount last year when we did our analysis, and today, when we looked at the actuals, it was less by about 14 gigawatts. So that's again, interconnection, siting, that's something that will come and talk about it. So what we see is that this new resource addition of wind and solar is helping, but it's insufficient to meet our goals. And those type of resources bring uncertainty because we don't know when they're all producing, and challenges on the integration that we're working through. And that's one of our significant efforts, is to bring all of those inverter-based resources into our fold so they meet the standards that we have in place to ensure the reliability, because we've seen issues in different areas of the US where they are creating challenges. Moving on to the next page on the demand growth, that's an interesting chart. This is what you see. This is every year that we do a long-term reliability assessment, similar to what the ISO does here. We project what the demand growth is going to be across North America. You see that our growth rate, I'm going to focus on that, we were forecasting 0.5% growth rate back in 2018, 19. It's not that far long ago. That's 5 years ago. Today, we're in the 1.5%. That's driven by new manufacturing capabilities that are being brought to the U.S., transportation, building electrification that I know New York, you're pushing quite a bit, and data center, Bitcoin, that's obviously it's been there, but it's really ramping up over the last couple of years. So depending on other forecasts, we tend to be very conservative. We use what we know and we feel comfortable putting into our analysis. Some other people might say that the growth could be as high as 4%. That's not a level of growth we've seen since back in the 60s. And that was a much, much smaller system than what we have today. 4% growth in the US system, that's significant. So again, we need to manage the changing mix growth that is significant. And the third element that I wanted to talk about is the extreme weather. Two messages on the weather. First is with a system that now relies a lot more on wind and solar, we need to think about weather patterns that we didn't have to think about when we had thermal generation that was isolated from a wind drought, for example, or a solar drought. So the planners now have to worry about wind drought. And the example that we have there on the left is a region from Canada to Texas. There was a day in June of last year where we had 60 gigawatts of installed wind capacity in the system. We had 300 megawatts, less than 1% of that showing up into the system that day. So that will happen. You just need to plan for it. That's just the feature of that type of generation that we just need to start accounting for in how we do planning, especially reliability planning. That's called a wind drought. And we've learned from other countries, there is a concept that comes actually from Germany, where they do have a lot of wind, and we have been talking to them to understand what they do to account for this. On the right-hand side, I don't expect you to follow the chart. It's difficult even for me to know, but the key message is the connection to the systems is important because now weather patterns run much deeper, longer, and impact many more regions than what we saw in the past. Just that's the nature of the weather patterns that we're seeing is that you cannot rely always on your neighbors. So that what happened in Winter Storm Elliott is PJM didn't have enough generation to send to the southern states. So that's why you start seeing some unplanned outages in Tennessee, North Carolina, and other states. I remember working at a utility in that space and frantically thinking about that we needed to do something before Christmas of 2022. So the key point is you need to, as we do planning, it's important to look at your neighbors and what's happening there to understand, can you or cannot you rely during particular weather events? And the last piece on the trends, before I get into the priorities, is dependence on gas on the next page. 20 years ago, natural gas represented about 15% of generation in North America. Today, we're 40, approaching 45%. That's only in the span of 2 decades. That's a significant change, driven obviously by the shale gas revolution. But what's most important is that some points during the winter, some systems rely heavily on gas, 60, 70%. And I would say the gas industry doesn't have the same approach to reliability to what we have in the electric industry. So we are counting on the gas industry in those very cold days to allow for the gas generation, which is a great resource. It flexes up and down very, very rapidly, and it meets what's happening on the electric system. But what happens if the wellheads are frozen, or the pipelines are sending all the gas to the gas LDC customers, or are having issues of their own? So I think we need to start, and we are working very hard to make sure that the gas industry takes the role that they play in the electric industry seriously and think about reliability the same manner that we think about those. And they're making progress, but we want them to do even more than that. So what we do is we put all of these pieces and we do a long-term reliability assessment every year. We publish that looks over 10 years what's happening on reliability. And we're going to release our next report on Tuesday of next week. So let's go to the map. You will see this. I mean, I'll talk about the points here on the page. If you go to the next page, what we see is that the picture, as I indicated, is concerning. It's blinking red and yellow. And what we see is that there is more than half of North America. It's either at elevated or high risk of having some potential reliability issues. Again, this is all these different conditions happen, and we don't have the resources that hopefully helps us drive to planning and operating parameters. So what we see is that the resource additions are not keeping up with the generator retirements, the large amount of generator retirements, and the demand growth. The reserve margins are falling behind, especially during the winter, and the generation installation is not keeping up. So that's all that it comes. And then when you test it with this extreme weather, that's why we have this map. This map 10 years ago, when we started publishing, was a lot of blue. So it definitely has changed and evolved. And changes doesn't always account for everything that is happening in a particular region, but it's a way for us to have a sense of what's happening in the US in terms of reliability. So let me close it out with what we think are the reliability priorities in the next slide. So what we see is, first, we need to really keep, obviously we want to meet demand growth, but we need to keep reliability in mind as we think about demand growth. That means that we really need to think clearly about new resources, new generation resources, because the system was tight before this level of demand growth. It's only getting tighter as we add all these demands. So new generation resources are going to be needed. Co-location of generation with data center might not always work, because if that generation is not running, guess what? All that load will show up on the system and will eat up resources. And we've seen that in Virginia area, some particular issues that we're following up. Second, we need to deploy resources that support the provision of what we call essential reliability services. And I won't get into the weeds, but for the technical side of NERC, that means frequency, voltage. There is more than just providing energy at the outlet. There is a level of quality, a level of frequency that needs to be maintained. And the system was designed with rotating engines in mind. Inverter-based resources just put energy, but don't provide that inertia. At some point, they might do it, but they're not doing it today. The other piece is we need infrastructure, transmission and gas. I mean, that's critical, and that means that we need to deal with siting and permitting as well. We need to also look into our planning process to ensure that we have fuel. That's really related to the gas piece, and we just enacted a standard that would ask entities to develop energy reliability assessments to see if you have a weather condition, would you have enough fuel, enough gas, enough diesel, whatever it is that you have in the system to ensure that you can meet the demand during a weather contingent event. And finally, we really need to think about changing our planning parameters. I know the ISOs are working on this to look not just at resource, do we have the capacity, but do we have energy 24/7? That means that we need to look at what is the amount of unserved energy that we might have in the system. And this is something that we've been learning a lot from our colleagues in Australia that have an energy parameter that they are designing to. So that would be the other piece that we're working on. So again, I lay out a lot of challenges that we see, but ultimately the beauty of the work that we do in reliability is the strength of all the stakeholder community. We're not there at NERC, the 200 of us working and figuring this out. We work across everyone that touches the bulk power system, inclusive all of you here in New York. So look forward to continued dialogue and for any questions, and I invite you to participate in any of our work, because that's how we get to the answers that we need. So thank you for the opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for that presentation. I'd ask the members of the board if they have any questions for Camilo.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Camilo. I appreciated the connection between the gas and the electric systems and the increasing use of gas for electricity driving a concern. And I'm curious if you could add a little additional detail to that as to what you see as needed to address that concern in the near term. We've had incidents in the country recently, most notably in Texas, where that has raised some concerns with weatherization and other things. But I'm wondering if there are any New York specific things on that subject that you think we should be looking at.
Yeah, so when we think about what we need to do there, we group it in about 3 different categories. The first piece is winterization, so making sure that the gas industry is taking to heart winterizing their system. That goes all the way from the natural gas wellhead to the pipeline to the gas LDC. Obviously, you have control over the gas LDC, and I know that's a significant focus of state regulatory agencies. But working with the gas industry, the pipeline, I'm sure that there is a New York Gas Pipeline Industry Association and the production to ask them, what are you doing to winterize? They have put voluntary statements about how they prepare for the winter, but you want to see that there is follow-up action on those. So that would be number 1. Number 2 would be potentially commercial arrangements between the pipeline and the generators that allow for the provision of services for reliability needs. So I think that's the other piece. And the other element is just communication. So one of the pieces that we see is sometimes there is not clear views of what's happening upstream in the natural gas in terms of potential production issues and how they might trickle all the way down to a gas LDC or electric generator. So we're encouraged the state regulators, NARUC, through the GEAR task force that you might be familiar, has launched and asked the American Gas Association to bring together the gas industry with the electric industry. So I would encourage you to go if you can. Short notice, Monday and Tuesday in Atlanta, there is going to be a natural gas readiness forum to really bring the industry to start sharing more. And one of the goals is if there is an emergency situation, you could get the right people on a call to understand what's happening upstream that we might need to be planning downstream. So communications, commercial arrangements, winterization. We believe at some point the gas industry needs to have a gas regulatory oversight similar to what we have in the electric industry.
Thank you. And then my final question, just thinking about the reliability metrics that you have established for the grid over the years and thinking about where the market is going, do you imagine need for any evolving or realigning existing markets to ensure that we have the reliability needed? I'm just thinking in terms of, from NERC's perspective, if there are any changes given the transition towards a more renewable energy dominated energy market, if there are any changes to reliability standards that may be needed.
Yeah, so two thoughts there in that question. The first one that I alluded first is one that we encourage, or we hope that the planning organizations begin to look at a number of metrics when doing planning. So traditionally you look at the resource adequacy and you look at the 1 in 10 event and you see, do you have enough capacity to meet that? So that's good, but we want that to be expanded to look at, for example, unserved energy or energy unavailability. So that's just a metric that you use in your planning processes to understand, are you going to have energy available all days, all hours of the year? Obviously, that's impossible, but kind of having a threshold that you plan the system for. And we have begun to see that, as I indicated, in Australia. ERCOT is doing some inroads in that space. Some particular utilities are using that in their integrated resource plan. So that would be one element. As it relates to market and tariffs, I would rely on my ISO friends to help me with that. But we do believe that there needs to be some work to think of how you value reliability. And is there's tariffs or market constructs that would indicate, hey, generator entering into a long-term pipeline deal, is there a way to collect that? Because today, absent that, it's very difficult for generators to see the value in a true market environment. How are they getting compensated if they are providing a social service? So how can you think about tariff constructs that take into account reliability services being provided, especially when we think about frequency, voltage? A lot of those services were provided by rotating plants just by the fact that they were rotating. There was you didn't need to think about it. It came along with a fossil plant, with a coal, with a natural gas. Now that you have solar and wind, they don't just produce that. So you might need to find a way to incent them to produce it. So let's say they develop what people call grid-informing inverters. So these are inverters that hopefully will produce and inject the bars, the voltage needed in the system, but there needs to be perhaps some way to think about how you compensate for that. The technology is not there, at least from what we see, but it might be developed if there is some type of tariff or market construct. But again, I'll let Emily and Zach correct me or add to that. But that's a couple of thoughts to your question, but those are very, very good ones. Thank you.
Thanks for that very helpful perspective. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the accelerating demand growth? I know I heard some examples that you said, and when you look at that potential for 4% growth, what other policy considerations should we be thinking of in response to that?
Yes. So I think the other pieces that come into play, first is kind of doing the assessment and understand where and how that manifests and by when. So that's point number one. Point number two, so once you have that, I do believe that's what the ISO has done, so they can share with you that. Then it's thinking what tools you have available. So transmission, transfer capability is one element I didn't touch upon, but we just recently filed with FERC a nationwide transfer capability study that evaluated energy availability across regions. We don't think that many people have done that across the entire US to see where adding transfer capability makes sense. And New York came out to be one of the top states where additional transfer capability could be useful. to tap into neighboring regions. So that's one. We would argue that you also need to consider retirements and assess the risk to retirements, especially early retirements, and understand what tools you have at your disposal to think about those resources and have them available when you might need them for reliability. You might not need them to run 24/7, 365, but you might need them in particular days. Think about the gas system and what type of infrastructure might be needed in the gas system to allow for that gas system to provide you more of that flexibility. Demand, and you talk about the demand response, demand flexibility. But ultimately, what we see is some of these tools need to be at scale. We don't need, to be honest, what we see in the system, 10 megawatts, 100 megawatts. We need some of these solutions to be at the gigawatt scale. So that's why you land on transmission, you land on pipeline, gas pipeline. I know you're focusing a lot on offshore wind, and that's a great resource. But again, doing the analysis of where the issues could be from reliability and look at what tools at the disposal, and it's going to be a mix of tools ultimately. That includes also demand response, energy efficiency, et cetera.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I want to just ask you a little bit about the dependence on gas and the concern around that. I assume you're thinking mostly natural gas, but how do you calculate or include in that paradigm renewable natural gas? Is there a factor there that...
Renewable natural gas in the sense of being used for generation?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that would be part of the, again, when we think of we pass this energy assurance standard that is requesting entities to look at their fuel availability and then test it in a short-term basis against some weather parameters or scenarios that might indicate that there will be a significant demand on the system. So what we want those entities is to figure out where are they going to secure the supply? Do they have secure supply, secure pipeline, secure renewable natural gas, whatever it is, the fuel that particular entity. So I think the key is to think about fuel supply from a security point of view. And do you have a way to secure that during significant events? So whatever is the resource, will it be diesel, fuel oil, you name it. So again, do you have enough? Is it a firm contract? Is there someone else that can take that supply away from you? And if so, what will you do in that event? Do you have a backup fuel? So that would be the way we think about that.
Thanks.
Any other questions from the members?
Would you mind elaborating a little bit more on when you talk about gas facility mains or transmission mains or distribution systems? You talk about weatherizing them.
Sure. So what we saw in the winter storm Elliott is that there were a number of unplanned outages that led to that, and we were trying to identify the root causes of those unplanned outages. So when we did the analysis, we found that a lot of what happened was the natural gas wellheads froze. So there was unavailability of gas, especially in the Marcellus and Utica shales. So what we have been asking the industry is to ask them, well, what would you do to winterize those? What type of activities or what would you do there to make sure that they will be available? Obviously, that's a difficult discussion in the natural gas production because it's a highly competitive business. So they need to understand how they're going to make those investments. But the idea is similar to how we have standards now for extreme cold. We're working on a cold weather standard for generators to ensure that they make the investments needed for that generation to be available at certain temperature set points is basically what we look for. We want to be sure that that generator is able to operate at minus X degrees. I forget what the number is, so don't quote me on that. But similar concept for the natural gas industry. Can you operate in those cold weather conditions? And if not, you need to make investments to be sure that you can do so. It's not an easy discussion to be had, especially with the natural gas production side of the house, because they are highly competitive and they are just not seeing what's the value of making that investment. But that's what we're pushing for, and that's what we think we need to look, what the specifics are. That's something I'll defer to engineers, but that's the concept is, can you design a system that can withstand and operate at certain parameters. And if not, you need to make the investments, otherwise you shouldn't be able to connect to the system. That's where we're coming from.
Thank you.
Thank-
Um, Yes, I want to thank you for that presentation, and I'll hand it back to Carl to introduce our next speakers.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much, Camilo. And thank you again for coming all this way and bringing some of these national insights to us. Before we zoom in to New York more, one other just quick question I had, because you've got a new concept for me. And again, thank you for bringing forward a preview of the study that you're going to be putting out next week. So it's a new definition for blue zone. And it was great to see how New York is in that blue zone. I'm curious if we can leverage some of your insights as you look across the country at the different blue zones. Are there themes that you can reiterate for us as to kind of what is keeping those regions in the blue zone, and what might be ways that, that we can learn from other regions? It's great that we're in a normal risk mode now, and it's fantastic for New York. But are there other blue zone lessons that you can share?
Oh, that's a good question. I think ultimately it's the combination of what you see in terms of retirements, level of demand growth, and additions. I think what we see and what we see in those blue zones is that there is a balance in all of those. So that there is kind of, you have reached a balance. But again, some of this work is dynamic, so it can change. If you begin to see a surge in demand here in New York, very quickly you can become an orange. So just making sure that you're looking at all of those as you do your assessment, continue to do it. And I know that ISO is doing that, but that's going to be the keys. Watch out for the retirements, make sure that there is additions kind of meeting that, but not only from a capacity, but from an energy perspective, and looking at what the demand growth is telling you about. So it's the combination of those three, and then test it against different weather patterns. That's the other piece. And think about extremes that perhaps before were not that normal, but now are becoming more normal.
Wonderful. Thank you again for joining us. So now we're going to zoom in to New York, and really a fantastic panel that we have today. So our next speakers are Emily Nelson and Zach Smith. We've got a double header here from the New York Independent System Operator, our NYISO. As Executive Vice President and COO of the NYISO, Emily leads the grid reliability and electricity market functions for the NYISO. In her role, she oversees market mitigation analysis, market operations, market structures, operations, and system and resource planning. So Emily has her hands full. Emily has 25 years of experience in the electric industry and has been at the NYISO since 2004. So we really have benefited from Emily's contributions to our grid for many years. And then to her left, as a Senior Vice President of System and Resource Planning for the NYISO, Zach Smith is responsible for the oversight and implementation of system planning and strategic initiatives for the New York State transmission system. Zach also oversees the interconnection process through which renewable resources and other new generation reliably connect to the New York State electric grid, and he represents the NYISO on interregional coordination committees. And I think we can thank Zach for a lot of his leadership as we've been looking at how to interact and work with our neighboring regions, which is becoming more and more important. So again, thank you both for taking the time and joining us today.
Thank you. And I'll start there. On behalf of my colleague, Zach and I, we're so pleased to be here and engaging in this important discussion with the board. We seek to provide you a better understanding of the state of New York's grid, and also to have a frank discussion and exchange on the growing reliability risks and challenges that we see. Diving more deeply into one of our planning studies, the reliability needs assessment, Zach will share a point of view on this growing reliability risk, but we'll also cover some of the work that is underway to bring forward solutions to move New York forward. And I think we owe a great deal of gratitude to Camilo for describing what the nation is managing with respect to reliability, because many of those same themes echo for us here in New York. Moving quickly through the slides, and I apologize to whomever is managing this for us, because we did err on the side of having a lot of content. So I hope to provide audio cues to keep us going. And I see that there's some work to bring these things up, these slides up. So in case you're not familiar, the mission of the New York ISO is to ensure reliability and competitive markets for New York in a clean energy future. And we are working together with stakeholders to also move forward with the vision that has been established by the state to build a reliable and clean, the most reliable and cleanest electric system in the nation. Our purpose has remained true through the years, going to the next slide, of enhancing reliability, operating open and fair wholesale electricity markets. More so now than ever, planning is a critical function for the organization as we seek to understand what the future grid looks like. And we also take very seriously our role to provide factual information for those engaged in this sector and increase the understanding of how we can all be successful. You will hear from us today, moving ahead 2 slides, on a few key themes that really help describe the current state of the grid within New York. Public policies absolutely are driving rapid change across the system. We are seeing narrowing reliability margins. I appreciated the conversation on the blue zone. We are trying to manage through generator deactivations. They are being driven by a multitude of factors. One being certainly the regulatory environment and the regulations, but additionally, we need to be mindful that the generation fleet in many ways is aging, and that also presents an acute challenge. At this point, deactivations are outpacing supply additions. We look forward to the continued construction, both of transmission and supply side resources that will help us meet some of the future demands across the state. And I would particularly like to emphasize and further the conversation on the nature of the challenges associated with the New York system transitioning to a winter peaking system, which is projected in the mid-2030s. And we'll go into some more detail on that. That presents some additional reliability challenges that we need to be prepared for. Moving to the next slide. We absolutely are dependent on natural gas, and interruptions to natural gas in particular during our coldest weather days currently are managed largely because we have dual fuel capability. We have oil backup. We are not immune, and nor were we immune to the impacts of Winter Storm Elliott that was mentioned. The key factor that made a difference for New York during that period of time was our dual fuel capability. We also are managing through a substantial interconnection process where we are working to quickly process interconnection requests while making sure that we're completing the necessary reliability studies. We look to help achieve the mandates of the Climate Act, and in order to do so, really valuing the attributes that will be necessary to manage reliability with emerging technologies is critically important. We see the wholesale electricity markets as administered by the New York ISO as an important tool that will help manage not only reliability, but also the cost effectiveness of the transition. I will quickly touch upon the next slide. It's a really valuable reference and something that garners a lot of attention each and every year that the NYISO publishes these graphics as part of our power trends. When you look at our generating capacity by fuel source, there's a lot of numbers on here, but to give you a quick metric, orange and every shade of orange really indicates a fossil-based resource. Currently, the New York fleet, from a capacity perspective, is just under 70% fossil-based. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see the energy production, and this is all for the year of 2023. We'll be updating these metrics soon. You'll see that from an energy production perspective, if you look here at sort of the green slices of the pie, you'll see that 49% of our energy production was zero emission. And I think that the emphasis that we need to provide with these metrics is that we certainly have a long way to go as far as reaching the mandates of the Climate Act. The good news is, and there certainly is some, if you go to the next slide, one of the key factors that will help achieve this vision is transmission. And a quick view of the transmission build that is underway, and this is really focusing on the cross-state bulk power transmission, but there certainly is work going on at a local level as well. There is quite a bit of transmission build that is completed and in flight and continuing into the future. And this will help address the concept of connecting the clean energy resources, which today are largely upstate, with the needs of the load downstate in and around the New York City area. Going to the next slide, you'll see a very simple graphic which describes our changing supply mix. And I'll emphasize here that we are working through narrowing reliability margins. And as we look forward, that resource entry is going to be critically important. Right now, deactivations are outpacing the entry that we need to help manage our reliability objective. And that is something that we certainly need to see solutions for, some of which are underway. Transitioning a bit, the next slide provides a view of our forecasted demand into the future. And I'll note the scale of this graphic and the next view is going out to roughly 2050. So it's quite far. I'd like to bring your attention to the expectation of major growth, which was some terminology that I caught from Camilo. The demand forecast is a really important factor in considering what we need from a reliability perspective into the future. And there is a great deal of uncertainty that is associated with those forecasts, and that really will help inform the reliability challenge that we need to manage. The next slide goes into a little bit more information on some of the changes that accompany the shifting demand forecast. And here I would like to spend a moment on the shift to a winter peaking system. When the ISO started rolling out this concept that we would shift from a summer peaking system to a winter peaking system as we experience greater electrification, not very deep into the conversation, Zach and I reflected with each other that that just means the entire year is going to be very, very hard. And so we need to be prepared that although we're projecting the shift from a summer to a winter peaking system in the mid-2030s, what that really means is we need to build systems, processes, resources, attributes, a grid that really provides the necessary energy and flexibility that will serve New York each and every day, each and every month, each and every season throughout the year. And in order to do so, we will need to figure out a solution to our current dependency on gas, certainly, as well as our dependency on dual fuel and how that factors into our future grid. Moving to the next slide, and I'll just spend a moment here before handing things over to Zach, just provides a greater view of some of our forecast on how each stack of that demand really builds to the future that we need to manage. So you can see the middle slice here is building electrification associated with winter demand, and that top slice is transportation and growing EV demand. All of that will help inform exactly what we need to manage during that winter peak condition. I'll pause there and hand it over to Zach to go deeper into the reliability needs.
Thanks, Emily. Go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to discuss the reliability needs assessment that we recently published. Our 2024 RNA looks 10 years out. The focus is on years 2028 to 2034. The reliability needs assessment is one of several assessments and reports that we produce at the NYISO to inform stakeholders, inform policymakers like yourselves as to what are the coming challenges, but of course opportunities as well in the future. The focus of this particular report, reliability needs assessment, is what it sounds like. What risks, what challenges do we envision for the next 10 years for which we need to be planning for. And that's the grander we. We need to all work together towards sufficient resources, transmission, and demand solutions to address some of these risks that we identify. In this year's RNA, a few highlights, a few key themes. One, we've already discussed it here today, and that's winter and winter risk. In this RNA, we are taking into consideration the potential unavailability of gas generation, specifically roughly 6,400 megawatts of gas-only generation. Because they do not have a firm contract, they may be at risk during winter peak periods. And so it has gotten to the point where we're concerned enough that those resources may not be available to us on those coldest winter days, such that we need to begin planning the reliability of the system to that system condition. So that is a very key theme in this year's RNA. In addition, just general demand growth, as Emily just described, but large load growth. So any kind of data centers supporting AI, cloud computing, but also chip fabrication. Of course, there's the Micron development in central New York and then other facilities throughout New York. Those all add up. I'll have a slide here in a moment that highlights that. That all adds up to the demand that we need to plan for on the system. And then anticipated generator deactivations. So there are we have a very large fleet, as Emily just summarized. Out of that fleet, there are some that may retire due to various regulations. There are some that may retire due to economics or just age, and we have to plan the system accordingly in case those resources are not available to us. In consideration of all of those drivers, in this year's RNA, we have identified a reliability need in New York City, and I'll touch upon that. Next slide, please. And I'll skip over the next slide. We'll go to, yeah, the next slide, please. So here's the map that I was just alluding to on large loads. Oh, I'm sorry, go back one. My voice is faster than the slides. On large loads, this shows as a highlight what loads, what large facilities, economic development across New York that we are currently planning for in our reliability needs assessment. I will note we are aware of much more than this, quite honestly, but we have to plan for what we think is seriously going to come at us here in the next number of years, and this map summarizes that. As you can see, Micron development in the Syracuse area, I mean, that is an outsized impact, but really it's the cumulative impact of all of this economic development that drives the demand across the system. Next slide, please. So it speaks specifically about the New York City need that we have identified. We take into consideration the demand forecast within New York City, the projected availability or unavailability of generation within the New York City area, and specifically for this 10-year horizon, taking into consideration the obligation on NYPA and their transition plan to transition these small gas plants offline by 2030. This result reflects that. Looking at the chart on the right, it shows what our reliability margins are in New York City. To start with the negative numbers in 2025, don't be too alarmed by that. That is reflecting what if we did not have the certain units in New York City that are impacted by the DEC peaker rule. The following year, what we're relying on is Champlain Hudson Power Express coming online, and that results in a very large jump in 2026. So it provides the reliability margin that we need to be confident of the reliability in the New York City area for a number of years. But then for one, as demand grows, but also once 2031 comes around and we assume that the NYPA small plants are unavailable at that point, you see these numbers drop negative fairly quickly. So that turns into a reliability need beginning in 2033 and then growing in 2034. Next slide, please. So that was the New York City area. Looking at the statewide, just keying off of some of what's been discussed already, the idea here is looking at resources as a whole. What is the total demand across New York State? What are the total resources that we anticipate are available to serve that demand? And do we have sufficient margins in order to maintain reliability? I will admit this is a fairly simplistic view of it. I want to highlight some of what Camilo described. There are various complex aspects to this, really getting into the attributes of reliability. What are the attributes we need in generation to be able to reliably operate the grid. This does not get into all of that detail. However, this really gets to a fairly basic detail of we need sufficient resources in order to serve the forecasted demand in New York State. And what these numbers are showing is that we run out of that margin by the 10th year. So in the 10th year, we are projecting a surplus of only 50 megawatts. That easily could go negative. That also easily could go positive, and I'll touch upon that before handing it back to Emily. So we have a number of different options available to us, but really what we highlight in the RNA is the risk that we're facing and the imperative that we pursue new resources on the system in order to make up this margin. Next slide, please. And we'll go one more slide. So when we identify these reliability needs, we will then pursue solutions through our comprehensive reliability plan. I won't go through the details on this slide. I will just say that we will consider any updates that we're aware of in the next few months now that we've published our reliability needs assessment. If a need still exists in New York City, we will then pursue solutions to that need, and that will all be documented in our comprehensive reliability plan to be published next year. Next slide, please. So one final set of thoughts before I hand it back to Emily, just what resources are available to us. So this need that we identified in New York City, it could be solved with transmission, it could be solved with demand side solutions like energy efficiency, demand response, those types of things, and generation or new resources. So what resources do we have available to us potentially? Next slide, please. Wrapping up right now is what we call our class year. Many of you are familiar with that term. Our old interconnection process culminated in what we call a class year. This last cycle of our current interconnection process resulted in 32 projects, summing up to about 4,400 megawatts throughout the state. And it includes a mix of solar, storage, wind, and a lot of these resources are not actually considered in our reliability needs assessment. That's intentional. We want to make sure that we're not glossing over reliability needs, that we are aware of what reliability needs could occur on the system in the future, and then after that, taking into consideration what resources may be able to help solve those needs. This represents a collection of one set of those resources. Go 2 slides ahead, please. So what I just described was our class year that is now wrapping up. What now is ahead of us is our new interconnection process that is handled through what we call a cluster study. And boy, do we have a lot of resources that are coming into our cluster study. And this really represents all of the initiatives here in New York driving this kind of development. We have more than 300 projects in our interconnection process, summing up to greater than 60,000 megawatts of nameplate capacity on the system. Half of that is storage. The rest of it is solar, wind. Really, this is representative of the amount of resources we are going to need in the future, as I described, with regard to statewide margins, with regard to specific locations like New York City. And so we have these resources in front of us. We need to start looking at all of them to consider what could serve as solutions for these needs that we've identified going forward. So with that, I'll hand it back to Emily to close us out.
Thanks, Zach. Before we close today, I'd also like to cover the role of wholesale markets within New York. And if you could move ahead 2 slides. One more. Thank you. So New York has a long history of building out our wholesale markets as a foundational tool to support the reliability objective for the state and also to manage the cost efficiency associated with supplying that reliability and the energy needs of New Yorkers. When you consider markets that allow for a grid in transition, what does that really mean? It means incentivizing the attributes that are necessary to meet reliability, having the tools available to make sure that the schedules are as aligned as possible to the needs, the physics of the power grid, and to make sure that the settlements align with the physics as well. Now more than ever, we're seeing that public policy is a driver of the grid transition, and we look to make sure that we're using our markets wholly to facilitate the objectives we have in New York. One of those things that's critical, we've touched upon it a number of times, the need for new resources. And so through time and continuing into the future, we continue to evolve our market rules to allow for new resource integration to meet that objective of a reliable and resilient power grid. Going to, this is perfect. So looking at the energy and capacity markets at a slightly deeper level, it's the energy and ancillary services markets which really establish the schedules for resources across the grid each and every day. And just to give you a sense of what that means, we, through our control rooms, really are establishing schedules on a daily basis, an hourly basis, a minute by minute, second by second basis to make sure that we're producing that power as optimally as possible. And if there's an unexpected event, recovering from that to meet the reliability objective. Prices for real-time energy and ancillary service markets are an essential part of incentivizing the flexibility we need on the grid. When you move over to the capacity market, historically that has been focused really on the peak needs of the system and making sure you have resources there on the ground or quite frankly now over the water to meet those capacity needs. Moving to the next slide, I'd like to talk a little bit about the challenges associated with the grid that we are managing and how that informs our market. So as I mentioned, we are evolving our markets to meet the demands of New York, the needs of New York, and some of the change that's underway. We are seeing that the resource base, having a diverse resource base is excellent. It supports operations. It provides a lot of optionality to operating the grid. We are seeing and preparing for a grid that has a lot more variability, that we need to develop tools to manage unpredictability, forecasting tools. We need to manage the retirement of the resources that today are providing much of the flexibility we rely upon. And we are looking to evolve our markets to integrate more and more clean technologies. If you could move forward 2 slides, I just would like to go one step deeper and then pause on some of the design work that we have underway. I think this might officially be the most boring slide we have, but it represents a great deal of work and forward thinking on what will be necessary in the future. So certainly managing demand is an important aspect of managing the future grid. Engaging the demand side, FERC Order 222 compliance, that's all about having resources that are managing demand, potentially behind the meter, and really help address those peak loads that we certainly need to be prepared for. Balancing intermittency, dynamic reserves, what the heck does that mean? It really means that when you have a more variable system, you need to tailor your reserve requirements for the specific needs at that point in time in order to have a cost-effective solution. Historically, the way that reserves were established, look at your largest contingency, make sure you have enough reserves to deal for that unexpected event and potentially secure that around the clock. Well, we need to be much smarter on how we approach that going forward, and we have the capability, and this work is well underway, to tailor our reserve procurements precisely to what's going on with the system, and also make sure we're fully representing the opportunity to use and move power across the transmission system in our reserve procurement. There's also several efforts that are underway that deal with very specific adoption of technologies and integrating those new resources. Capacity markets is addressed on the following slide, and I'm going to keep this really high level. It's important that we review our capacity market structure and make sure that the market signals that we are establishing are aligned with the reliability needs not only of today, but that will serve us into the future as the grid transitions. Concepts that were discussed already, the idea of thinking about unserved energy is important. The concept of making sure the capacity market is working effectively for procurements, not only in the summer, but the winter is really important. And we have taken many steps in this direction to align resource value with the reliability contribution of those resources. That's something that we need to continue to work with stakeholders on. And I will just close by saying that we are very committed to a reliable transition to New York's clean energy future. We see wholesale markets as a tool to make this transition more cost effective. And we think it's absolutely critical to have a shared understanding of the risks and challenges that we need to confront and find solutions to in order for all of New York to be successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Zach. What questions do the members of the board have for our NISO colleagues? Please. Yep, please.
Obviously, we are New York, and we all know we're the great Empire State. And we passed the CLC-CPA, which has a lot of ambitious goals, but it also has some restraints. Are there things that other states, and maybe Camilo can weigh in on this too, other states are doing or have done to create resources to really get in ahead of this, the risk and the reliability issue that we might look at?
From my perspective, there's a lot of good work underway in New York. One of the best examples of moving New York forward is the focus on building out transmission. And I think we've had a great deal of success, arguably on par, if not more successful than a lot of regions in the country, using existing rights of way, coming together to find solutions, and working with communities to make sure that we're not disrupting them to the maximum extent possible as we support this build. The other thing that is something New York has been mindful of, and this is in Zach's purview, but it's a common issue, a common challenge across the country, is the interconnection of new resources, right? So the NISO has and continues to focus on doing our part by proceeding through the interconnection process, reforming the interconnection process just as quickly as we could. We actually implemented changes to our interconnection process prior to receiving federal approval for those changes because we sensed and see the urgency to bring on these new resources. And so that's an example of how we are taking action within New York. I don't think we need to be very mindful of the solutions that are being presented across the nation. And we have several regulatory forums and collaboration through NERC and other agencies to share those best practices. But this is quite frankly a lot of coming together, a lot of hard work, a lot of being clear-eyed about some of those reliability challenges and finding solutions.
Thank you. In terms of what are the best practices, isn't transmission one of the more expensive pieces in this mix? And so if we're setting up situations where we're generating in upstate and the transmission costs and all of those, I mean, I know there's obviously recent news around that front. Where does that fit in terms of the things we should be advancing first and foremost compared to other things that we might be doing?
It's a fantastic question. So I will say, so through NISO's collaboration with the various state agencies, as Emily described, we've actually been here in New York, perhaps the most successful across the entire country in terms of effectively implementing transmission planning and getting transmission built. To answer your question, really part of that process, a very key important part of the process, is to understand benefits compared to costs. And so while the price tag alone, sometimes people can look at it and say, why? Well, we give the why. We want to show what benefits are provided. And I will say we take that very seriously and we take that into consideration when determining which transmission projects are in federal speak more efficient or cost effective. That's the terminology. That's the standard that we're held to. So when we look at a project, is it more efficient or cost effective than something else? And really the idea with transmission is to have the most efficient grid and efficient access to the grid. So for any given demand, whether it's New York City, whether it's a chip fabrication, whether it's any kind of economic development, making sure that that demand has efficient access to resources. And how do you get there? And as I said, we've had great success here in New York, and it has been in consideration of, are there sufficient benefits, economic benefits, relative to the costs?
Just, it's a different topic, but something that you asked prompted me also a question that you had asked. When we look at New York, one of the studies that I know it's been happening with MPCC and New England is looking at the gas infrastructure. We mentioned how much we rely on the gas infrastructure, but we need to look at the points of failure on the gas system that could lead to electric reliability issues. So I know there's been a very in-depth study to look at that system and what could be the issues in the gas system that could have impacts on the electric system. I think that's a one of a kind type of study that it is being pursued by MPCC, one of our regional entities, working with the ISOs, working with New England to really assess what you might need to ask or think about from the gas infrastructure. So I will call that out beyond the transmission development that it was highlighted here. And sorry to be kind of always coming back to this point, but how you think about the planning, and we've seen other regions begin to include these resource, not only resource adequacy, but energy adequacy. And I think that's something that Zach alluded to, but that's something that you see through the reliability needs assessment. So looking at the gas infrastructure, the transmission, and the planning criteria, I do think New York is doing some of the things to try to anticipate what's happening, but a lot more work it needs to be done as they highlighted.
Sure.
Do you find, on the electric side of the business, do you find there's more issues with the distribution system or the transmission system? Because usually, I think it's the distribution system. And do you think, the second point, question will be, would you think enhancing or finding funds to increase the number of substations in a downstate area would be feasible?
I'll answer the first part, and I might ask Zach for some help on the second. Well, from the New York ISO's perspective, we are responsible for bulk power, so the transmission side. So from our myopic point of view as an organization, it is the transmission issues that cause us more challenges. But from the very important lens of the customer, certainly, I've had to clarify with my mother that her outage is not because we have a blackout, but instead because there is a local issue. So certainly from the customer's perspective, I think the distribution system is quite important. And so we look to coordinate with our partners to make sure that reliability is served across both of those planes, because the net effect to the customer, it doesn't really matter, right? If they're experiencing an outage, they're experiencing an outage. So there's a lot of people that need to come together in order to serve the end user. On the substation piece, I'll hand it to Zach.
Yeah, happy to. It really kind of gets to the answer I provided a moment ago, where the idea with transmission, and that can apply to, you could think of it as any wire, any infrastructure. The idea behind that is efficient access to efficient resources. So making sure the demand has efficient access to resources. So when you think about on the distribution side, for example, something we work with the individual utilities about is the distribution of their load, the distribution of their demand. So from a top-down view that we have, looking at the transmission system and how that can efficiently serve the demand, is there a better way for them to distribute the demand across their own system, thus through substations, to your question, such that it can be served in a far more efficient way than what it is today. Does that necessarily result in more substations? Not always. It's more about the distribution of that demand throughout any given area and how is that best served through a set of substations. So it could result in more substations. It could result in reconfiguration of local grids, anything along those lines. It all is with a very similar objective of finding the most efficient way to get the resources to the demand. Yep.
Gas question.
Oh, of course, please.
This one's about the gas facility and transmission systems. Have you ever heard about the gas heaters? Because in the downstate area, we have gas heaters. Because we know the gas that is on the facility mains crossing across state line is monitored by the DOT federal. So when it enters New Jersey, we have gas heaters which allow us to provide our customers a good quality of natural gas in the downstate area without the system freezing up.
That sounds like an excellent mitigation measure. I think some of the issues that were highlighted by Camilo are issues that cut across the country, which is really if you haven't freezing at the wellhead, then you're not able to deliver that gas onto the pipeline system in the first place. And that is something that certainly that coordination between the gas and electric side, interested if solutions can be developed to tighten that coordination. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the questions. We will move along. I'll hand it back to Carl.
Perfect, and thank you, Zach, for handing down the mic. So again, thank you to those excellent set of presentations. I will also note, just in terms of the co-optimization of transmission and distribution, it's certainly an area that NYSERDA is keenly interested in, and we're actually in the process of funding tools and spending resources to think about how do we co-optimize these two different levels. So if it's an area of interest, we can certainly chat more after. So the next speaker I have the pleasure of introducing is Jessica Waldorf. Jessica is the Chief of Staff and Director of Policy Implementation at the New York State Department of Public Service, where she is responsible for the development and implementation of regulatory policies in the areas of clean energy, utility regulation, and market innovation. And so we don't let her forget, she also recently served as the Interim Executive Director of the Office of Renewable Energy Siting and Electric Transmission, ORES, where she was responsible for the siting of large-scale major renewable energy generation projects and major electric transmission facilities in New York State. So Jess has had several jobs at the same time. So Jess, thank you for joining us today, and a perfect segue on the previous question about distribution system.
Thank you, Carl, and thank you to the State Energy Planning Board for inviting me to present today. So as Carl said, I'm the Chief of Staff and Director of Policy Implementation at the Department of Public Service. We're the staff arm to the Public Service Commission and responsible for the regulatory oversight of New York's investor-owned utilities, both electric, gas, water, as well as telecommunication corporations, municipal utilities, energy service companies, and power generators. And our mission is to ensure affordable, safe, and reliable access to those essential services. The department's also responsible for developing and implementing the state's clean energy policies in a way that benefits New York consumers and stimulates competitive markets. And so today I plan to highlight the Commission's Zero Emission by 2040 proceeding, which is really relevant to the discussion that we just had, as well as several updates to Commission policy proceedings that are focused on transmission and energy system planning. And with that, we'll go to the next slide. So as many of us know, the Climate Act set forth targets for the electric sector to guide it away from reliance on fossil fuels. The first is 70% electricity by 2030 to be generated by renewables. And the second one, which is presented here, is that by 2040, the statewide electrical demand system is to be zero emissions. The Commission's Zero by 40 proceeding was launched in May of 2023 to explore what is necessary to achieve a zero emission by 2040 grid that is safe and reliable. The Zero by 40 proceeding will unfold in several stages, and the first of which is well underway now, where we're defining the statutory terms that establish the target and the context to which it applies. Next step will be that we'll adopt an approach to characterizing the potential gap between expected supply and demand in 2040 and beyond. And then we will designate technologies that will be needed to satisfy the standard. These various steps will lay the groundwork for whatever programmatic measures might be undertaken to take that progress towards the target. Since the commission has launched the proceeding, staff's hosted a number of technical conferences and received numerous comments in the proceeding in response to the initiating order and subsequent questions that have been posed by staff. In addition to these process staff at the department, as well as NYSERDA, are researching candidate technologies in depth in order to develop a preliminary assessment of their techno-economic potential and to identify key hurdles into their development. This research will help inform, subsequent steps that I highlighted before. And on November 4th of this year, department staff issued a proposal that recommends definitions for the statewide electrical demand system and the 2040 target standard of zero emissions. The proposal defines those two key terms, and the definitions are highlighted on the slide here. It's important that we define these terms because they mean a lot in terms of what types of resources are going to count towards 2040 and how we're going to get there. And so the first one on statewide electrical demand system does a couple things, clarifies that imports from out-of-state generation resources and behind the meter resources that are interconnected to either the bulk power system or retail utilities distribution system are considered part of the statewide electrical demand system. Those were key questions that were, those were key questions that were posed in the proceeding, so we're answering them in the staff proposal. We can go back, thank you. And the second is zero emissions. And zero emissions is a term that needed clarity based on the language within the statute. And so the staff proposal provides that and outlines a few recommendations to the commission for this definition. The first is that we limit emissions included in the 2040 standard to greenhouse gas emissions only, so meaning not including co-pollutants. There's a lot of detail in the staff proposal as to the why behind that, and the why is also included in the statute itself. The second is that we count emissions from the operation of generation facilities from the production of fuel consumed by those facilities. And again, more detail in the proposal on that point. And the last is find that the state is complying with the 2040 standard with respect to imports, so long as New York's net imports, meaning that emissions adjusted from imports versus emissions adjusted from exports of electricity are clean. As you can see from the overview that I provided so far, this is very complex and certainly, a lot of additional detail in the proposal. Another thing that the proposal does at the very end is something that I think, is important to highlight here in the discussion of reliability and affordability. Basically, staff prompted at the end of the proposal that the term zero emissions will create challenges and constraints for the power sector. And I think to some of the points that have been highlighted by my colleagues, it's important to really think about the proper mix of resources in 2040 and the attributes of those resources. And so, with colleagues both at the state level as well as partners at the New York ISO, we're going to have to do a lot of work between now and 2040 to make sure that those resources are in place and that we don't risk any harm to some of the other core concepts of reliability and affordability. And with that, we'll go to the next slide. And so this slide provides an overview of 3 key proceedings that are focused on grid planning. Before I go into depth here, I think it's also important to note that as a state, we're not operating in a silo. We're also doing work both regionally with some of our neighboring states to really think through what the optimal use and build out of our transmission system looks like. And so the commission really plays a key role in energy system planning to ensure that our grid, through an array of transmission planning activities, is ready for growing demand as electrification takes hold and to meet the growing demand of the integration of renewable energy resources. Since 2002, the commission has approved over $8 billion in funding for both bulk and local transmission upgrades throughout the state. These investments are going to allow us to capture the full benefit of existing renewable energy resources and will advance transmission projects in areas of upstate New York where major economic development projects are seeking to locate. And, some of that we heard from the prior presentations. The slide here provides an overview of these 3 key transmission planning proceedings, which I'll go into detail on the subsequent slides. And with that, we'll switch to the next slide. So key to the build out of a clean electric grid and the integration of renewable resources is the need to update our transmission and distribution system to one that's robust enough to handle steadily increasing demand and resilient enough to withstand extreme weather. and changing climate. So we need to think strategically, and we are at the department and commission, about a transmission planning process that can facilitate the large amounts of renewable energy into our biggest load centers and meet the needs of an ever-changing resource mix. That's why the commission created the coordinated grid planning process to identify the transmission investments needed to meet Climate Act objectives cost effectively and to fulfill system planning requirements outlined in the Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act. This planning process in and of itself builds off of several efforts that have been well underway for years, and work that the department has been doing in close collaboration with NYSERDA, New York Power Authority, the electric utilities, and the New York Independent System Operator, and the private sector to support major investments to increase the amount of renewable electricity available and to modernize the electric grid. The process proceeds through a number of detailed electric system studies. The first stage, which the New York ISO is supporting through the development of a long-term least cost capacity expansion plan, is the utilities' regular running granular system studies to determine transmission and distribution upgrades required to meet Climate Act targets. More information on that can be found on the website, and specifically the committee that's referenced at the top, the Energy Policy Planning Advisory Council, which is a stakeholder advisory group made up of several stakeholders and also includes a dedicated group of members that are focused on environmental justice, something that the commission felt was very important in the setup of this process. The first cycle of this process is well underway and will provide a comprehensive view of long-term needs on the bulk and local transmission system, as well as on the distribution system. Results in the form of proposed transmission upgrades will be submitted to the commission in late 2025. And from there, we may designate things like public policy transmission needs or other investments that need to be undertaken by the utilities. And with that, we can go to the next slide. So the next is proactive planning. And in August of 2024, the commission issued an order to establish a proactive planning proceeding and directed the state's utilities to develop a framework to consider planning infrastructure projects proactively to meet new loads anticipated for the adoption of electric vehicles and the electrification of buildings, both of which have a significant impact on the demand on the electric grid. The commission launched this proceeding out of recognition that there is a significant need to address these infrastructure upgrades that are necessary to support growing demand, and also, the related economic development that those opportunities can bring to the state. The commission directed the utilities to submit 2 filings, one including the study framework and one proposing urgent grid needs. The latter, the urgent grid needs, was the first that was due back to the commission. And as of, I think, November 26th, we have proposals from all the utilities outlining the urgent grid infrastructure upgrades that are necessary and requesting action by the commission. The next is the study framework, and that's actually due tomorrow. So this is very timely. It will include a proposal for a long-term coordinated planning process to study and identify necessary upgrades to support electrification. In the proposal, the utilities have to account for these new electrification loads, not just including the transportation sector, which was the initial focus of this proceeding and related to medium and heavy duty vehicle infrastructure build out, but also to the electrification of buildings such as housing or industrial loads related to economic development that can similarly drive system upgrade needs. And so to really summarize this proceeding, for years, we've been planning and, doing a lot of work through our utilities. And what we're seeing now is when a utility goes to build, a substation upgrade or whatever electric system upgrade is needed, they shouldn't be building it just to meet that one need. And they should instead be thinking about all the other electrification needs that are going to be coming down the pike, because it's certainly, more efficient to plan for and build that infrastructure with that in mind now versus having to go back several years, which results in increased costs and increased time to meet demand needs. And so that's really the goal of this proceeding, and we're certainly excited to see what comes of the proposals and the overall study framework. And with that, we'll go to the next slide. And so Grid of the Future, the goal of this proceeding is really to develop a comprehensive Grid of the Future plan for New York to identify the policies and investments that are necessary to unlock the full potential of flexible resources such as demand response, distributed energy resources like small-scale energy storage, electric vehicles and smart thermostats, and virtual power plants to achieve our clean energy goals at a manageable cost and at the highest levels of reliability. We know that the transition to a fully decarbonized system is going to require significant investment in new infrastructure, some of which we just talked through on the transmission side. And the Commission's authorized several programs, including planning processes highlighted here, but also programs like the Clean Energy Standard, which is the state's renewable energy program, and New York Sun, along with planning processes for electrification to identify and fund the grid investments necessary to achieve the goals of the Climate Act. However, the Commission also knows that the deployment of flexible resources, such as the ones that I highlighted just now, can avoid the need to develop some of the large-scale infrastructure and would otherwise support the electrification of the state's economy. And so creating opportunities for these distributed energy resources, which consumers are deploying, can also create meaningful savings opportunities for those same consumers who choose to engage in demand response programs, while also generating grid benefits that improve reliability and reduce costs for all customers. There's also been significant advancements in the deployment of utility smart grid technologies like advanced metering infrastructure, along with private sector investment in distributed resources, enabling software aggregations, which are now moving into the state, that make now the right time to really support this type of initiative. The first deliverable in this process is going to be a grid flexibility study, which staff must file in January of 2025. The study will estimate the current and potential future growth in these resources and their capabilities, along with recommended options for how to achieve optimal levels of growth. The second is the first New York Grid of the Future plan, which is due in February of 2025, so right after the turn of the calendar year, and will identify improvements to the distributed system planning processes that the state's utilities have been doing for years, originally initiated under the Reforming the Energy Vision proceeding, and will support the growth in these flexible resources. Staff recently held a technical conference that goes into a lot more detail on this proceeding on November 15th, and more information can be found in the slides and recording on our website. But in summary for this proceeding, changing generation resources and increasing electricity needs are going to drive the need to deploy more flexible resources throughout the electric system. This proceeding really focuses on the critical need for the grid to handle future operating needs in the most efficient and cost-effective manner, while still maintaining reliability by leveraging these types of new means and methods to provide flexibility in comparison to existing electric system operations. And so really being able to leverage the flexibility of these resources, the hope is that we can avoid some of the more costly infrastructure investments if we're able to actually maximize the resources that we're already putting onto the grid. And so in closing, just in summary of the various proceedings, I think we've made a lot of really significant progress as a state. We definitely can feel confident that we have the right system planning processes in place. These various proceedings that are focused on 3 different aspects of the transmission planning process really set us up for success in the coming years to do good planning, to make sure that we're authorizing the right investments. And certainly there's a lot more work to do. And so the work that's taking place in 0x40 and transmission planning proceedings and all of the other ongoing proceedings that are going on at the Department and Commission really demonstrate our strong commitment to making sure that we have a clean and reliable electric grid while maintaining our role of ensuring that that same service is safe, reliable, and affordable. And that's it.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Jessica. So I think in the interest of time, I'm going to walk through a couple of slides as well. And then I think during our wrap-up session for any board thoughts, we can go around and see if there's any wrap-up questions. So I think we'll jump to the next slide. Hopefully through the process of all these presentations, it makes clear what I said earlier, which is we're really looking to do synthesis of this work and then bring some new insights so that you all can be able to think more deeply about the future of our energy system. What I wanted to speak to briefly, though, before we wrap, is the supplemental study that we are required to do, which again is a synthesis of the transmission and distribution system, and then just one slide on exploring the evolution of electricity markets, given some of the discussion we've had today. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned during our September meeting, Article 6, Section 108 of the Energy Law requires the board to undertake a supplemental study of the overall reliability of the state's electric transmission and distribution system. So we just have some of the key pieces of the statute there. Again, as I mentioned, I'll round out by sharing some of the scope of this T&D study. and then we'll talk briefly about market evolution. So the assessment will include a review of the current and projected reliability of the bulk transmission system and the distribution system, as well as the impacts of several factors on reliability. Many of these questions have been addressed in recent studies, so we'll be able to build off of that work. Next slide. So here's an outline of the study as we've pulled it together. We've done this once before, so we're building on our past experience. We will systematically review current and future transmission distribution system issues. We'll look at investments and expenditures in our systems. We'll take a look at the environmental regulations, and then look at some of the key energy policy initiatives. Next slide, I highlight some of those. So in terms of the key policy initiatives we'll review, we'll look at state and regional policies such as the Clean Energy Standard that was mentioned, and obviously the Climate Act. We'll look at key federal policies such as FERC orders 1920 and 2023. We'll examine the support of existing and new technologies such as nuclear power, which we've been talking about as a state over these past few months. We'll look at the policy effects on load alongside our demand response programs. And finally, we'll look at any departures from traditional regulatory rate-making mechanisms, such as the performance-based rate-making that we've seen in some recent years. Next slide. So to get a little bit into the process, to execute on the study, we've enlisted the help of both GE and E3, who bring some deep expertise on these issues, and we've worked with them in the past as part of past energy plans. We also have an advisory board that includes the NYISO, DPS, who we have today with us on stage, transmission owners, utilities, and the Reliability Council of New York. So really the key technical folks who will be able to give insights and bring forward some of their own studies to inform the board as we look at this critical issue. Next slide, please. So this is my last wrap-up slide. I wanted to give, given that we're talking about our electric system, I want to take a moment to highlight one of the topics that we'll be exploring as part of our state energy plan. We've had a number of questions on the evolution of markets. I think we all recognize the markets will look different in 2040 than they did 20 years ago. And so this will be a topic that we will engage in as part of our energy plan process. The topic was discussed by speakers, but I've highlighted some of the issues that we're going to be looking at as part of the energy plan. So we're looking at enhancement of the participation of flexible demand-side resources. Grid flexibility is a key part of the proceeding that Jessica just spoke to ensure that incentives are adequate for the participation of clean, flexible resources. Next, we'll be looking at improved capacity market signals for resources needed to meet state clean energy targets while maintaining reliability. Emily and Zach spoke to some of those issues on the electricity markets previously. We'll be creating the potential new ancillary services products, also spoken to by our NYISO colleagues, or to improve current ancillary services market signals for resources needed to meet our clean energy targets. We will review system planning processes to see if changes are needed to better inform market structures and outcomes. And finally, we'll be pursuing opportunities for energy storage to participate as a transmission resource, which actually is one of the projects at the NYISO right now. So this gives you some of the highlights of the areas we will be exploring as we look at the evolution of our markets. We're deeply committed to seeing how we can harness markets to allocate scarce resources in New York. And we recognize that we're entering a new paradigm and we have to evolve those systems. Next slide. So with that, I'll close out this portion of the agenda and turn it back to Doreen. And we'll have some board discussion and then next steps.
Yes, thank you. And I want to thank all of our speakers, Camilo, Emily, Zach, Jessica, and Carl. Do any members of the board have questions for any one of our speakers? Well, thank you all. And I will also ask if we turn, oh, this is the right side. If any of the members have any other business to bring before the board.
I just wanted to take a minute to congratulate you on your report that you just did on the growth in the clean energy sector. It is stunning. I saw some of this information a couple of months, I was in Somos, I think, and it really is incredible. The growth is so rapid and the quality of the jobs is so good, and the the satisfaction of the workers is really remarkable. We are doing, we do the Office of Just Energy Transition, so we were very excited about this news. So congratulations, and the report is really well done.
Well, thank you for that. And the data is fantastic when you look at the job growth compared to other sectors of our economy, but also the ways in which one of the main findings of the study was that we see rapid growth, the most rapid growth in the transportation sector. These folks see that as a challenge. We see it as an opportunity, right, for employment and for career sustaining industries. So thank you for highlighting that. And that's reflective really of the work that we've been doing together over the last few years. None of this would be happening. This load growth wouldn't be happening if it weren't for our work in advancing toward our climate law. And this certainly this board is central to successfully navigating those challenges and opportunities.
Yes.
So thank you. Well, moving on, I'd just like to briefly highlight some next steps because certainly if we turn to the next slide, we are turning the calendar over to 2025. But first, public comments on the draft scope will be accepted until December 16th. So what you can expect as members of this body is that we will both release the final scope in early 2025, followed by the draft plan. Be on the lookout for a number of meetings, including public hearings that will occur on the topic of the draft plan over the course of 2025. So for others, please do subscribe to our State Energy Plan email updates for forthcoming details regarding those public hearings and more. Next slide. I want to thank all board members and their delegates for coming to this meeting and for your participation today. For members of the public who observe this meeting in Albany or via the webcast, thank you as well. We very much welcome your input on the draft scope. So please do sign up and access our website for more information. And with that, this meeting of the State Energy Planning Board is hereby adjourned. Thank you all.